Yeah, Dr. Chapman and I have some history over at the U, and he asked me to come and speak about a project. I think that's parlaying from Dr. Zirkle came last month, I heard, to speak with you all here. Is that correct? So Jens and I, Jens allowed me the opportunity while we were over at the U to take a month off and go do some research in Tanzania. So I'm going to speak about that probably for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then Rod asked if I would talk about my outcomes work, which is what I'm more recently spending a lot more time in, and actually has more spine implications. So we'll kind of do two separate talks today, and I'll take questions. I don't know how this runs, but feel free to interrupt at any time. So this was fun. I did this project in 2012. And it was fun to kind of go back and review and think about the research techniques I learned doing something abroad in a low and middle income country setting, and very different from, Dr. Zirkle presented a lot of the clinical work Sign does. And I was able to use that work and then translate it into a research study. So, clicker. All right. So the outline for this first talk I'll just give a little background. I know Dr. Zirkle touched on a lot of this, so I'll probably go through that a little quicker. Anytime you do research in a low-income country, there's a lot of stakeholders involved. I learned a lot doing global health research that it's just not one institution that goes in and does this type of work. It usually involves a lot of groups and a lot of institutions. And then I set out with certain aims for my research study. And as you'll learn when you do this type of work too, they change often, because when you're in the field in a country that doesn't have as many resources as we're used to here, you have to work around it, and you have to figure out how to answer maybe not quite the question you wanted, or another, as you'll see, another opportunity presents itself to answer something else. So I know Dr. Zirkle touched on this. I think it is fascinating to think about orthopedic care in other countries, that it's equal, the number of deaths equal to traumatic events is equal to the number of HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. So, we have a lot of organizations here, PATH and big global health, the Gates Foundations, that do a lot of work in these other areas, HIV, AIDS, and malaria. And there's this niche that's missing that Dr. Zirkle has really been able to, capture, that there's a lot of fracture events, and they actually lead to more disability in people who really, if they get the right treatment early on, can then go on and lead fulfilling lives. So I think Dr. Zirkle had come and done a grand rounds at UW, and it really stuck with me, the work he was doing. And so that's what then led to my interest in this. So you'll see when I did this project, a lot of people were engaged. So initially I had partnered with Sign. I contacted Dr. Zirkle and asked, I have this opportunity to do a global health fellowship. I would really like to partner with your organization. Where do I begin? Where do I start? And they have a wonderful partnership with Muhimbili Orthopaedic Institute in Tanzania. And I think I noticed some of the pictures from his talk featured, I was like, I recognize that operating room and that conference room. It's a much more academic setting there, and so the opportunity to conduct research is a little easier in this hospital in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. As you'll see, this project involved using mobile health technology, and so that was partnered with the Computer Science and Engineering Department and School of Computer Science at UW, and so I met with a group that was running a program called Open Data Kit, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then obviously my funding was through a fellowship that came out of the Department of Global Health. My PhD program is the Pharmaceutical Outcomes Research and Policy Program, which hopefully that PhD will be done by early spring, just in finishing up the writing phase, and hopefully to defend soon. And then obviously Jens at the time was at UW and allowed me the opportunity to pursue this from that aspect as well. And then finally I included the group I got, and it's the Institute for Global Orthopedics and Traumatology, and this is out of the University of California, San Francisco. And they're probably I would say the leader in global health research in the orthopedic space, and have a whole center designed to look at orthopedic care in low and middle income countries. And I partnered, at the time, it was one of their residents who was a former medical student of ours at UW. And it just so happened that we both were going to be in country at the same time. And so we worked together, and I was able to use the technology from the Open Data Kit and help him with his study as well. So I know Dr. Zirkle came and spoke about Sign, and so I don't think I'll spend much time on this. But in approaching sign and asking, you know, what are some research questions, or where are some projects that you see a need to help your organization improve or do better, or help other hospitals that are participating in sign move forward. And so they, it's interesting, they have this database, and it's really a wealth of data, but it's not designed for research, it's designed for clinical tracking of their implants. And what they really want from these is follow-up. They want to see, how do patients do when they put these nails in. And they've even kind of, they say that it's a requirement to be a sign hospital, that you have a certain percentage of cases that you upload into this system. And they wondered, you know, is there a better way to improve it? I think currently the reporting levels, you know, were in the 10 to 25%, and they obviously they'd love to see 100%. So my job was to figure out a way to maybe improve that reporting criteria. One of the reasons this is the reporting so low is obviously a lack of internet connection, you know, to connect to the database that then reports back to sign. But what I learned over time is it wasn't even just an internet connection issue. It was the fact that patients, it's very hard for them to come back to follow up. And we struggle with that problem here, right? That patients get treated and then they go off, and especially here, I think in the Northwest, we see people from Alaska and Montana and Wyoming and all these other states, and they come and they get their surgery and then they may follow up elsewhere. Well, think about in countries where transportation's poor, resources, they don't have the money to get back to their physician. So they get fixed and then they move on. So I really learned, and I think sign wasn't fully aware of how hard it is for the patients to come back for follow-up. So it's not a matter of the surgeons that use the sign nail reporting, that they just never see the patients again. And you can imagine what it takes for us to run research studies here and get patients for follow-up. You know, they just don't have the personnel to be able to track these patients down, much less find them, right? What town they live or their neighbor. You learn a lot about, you identify based on buildings or churches or hospitals. You know, there's just no addresses even to track people.
Amy,
yeah.
Dave Hanscom is one of those guys. Not good. I don't want to put too much pressure on
Okay, all right.
Dr. Mesquita's personally researching this.
So a little bit about Muhimbili that was really interesting that I learned. It's not necessarily a public hospital. I think people think in a lot of resource poor countries that most of the hospitals are publicly run, but they're not. A lot of them are a mixture of public and private patients. So patients that then come and pay privately to get seen. And it's one way they actually, the physicians fund themselves, is to have some of these private beds. It's a way they can sustain their programs. So it's a mixture, and you'll see it's a 150-bed hospital, but it usually has 200 patients. So a lot of patients are on floors and in hallways, and really, really interesting. And I credit Dr. Ilieza and Haonga. Billy and Edmund were amazing, and these two surgeons run this whole program, very active in sign and also internationally in promoting orthopedic care in Africa. Very dedicated, and they spend their whole time at that hospital helping patients, and then also have an interest to do research, which is awesome. And the operating rooms are really fascinating. It's one big room, and then there's 3 surgeries going on with just like a little partition in between. Usually it was 2 orthopedic cases and then 1 full neurosurgery case going on with cranial headgear and the full 9 yards. So it was pretty fascinating to see that set up as well. So a little bit about the mobile technology I used in this project. Open Data Kit is it's an app that actually collects data using an Android phone. And the really interesting thing is it began as a sabbatical project. It's in Google by this professor, Gaetano Borriella, who, as I was reviewing this, just passed away last year. So, but made a lot of contribution to international data use, and especially in the health technology world. And then his work was then developed further out by a young man named Ya Ankonawa, who now has a company that this is all they do is mobile health technology in low and middle income countries. So it was originally used as population data collection, so for a lot of HIV/AIDS studies and collecting incidents and reporting patients' adherence to medication. And it's a pretty facile tool, and it's very easy to program. I have some coding background, but had to learn a whole new programming language, but was able to design a survey and basically translate the sign database onto this mobile platform using this app. And the really cool thing when you're doing this type of work in a low and middle income setting is you can track your GPS coordinates. So if you're out in the field using this, it'll let people know, you know where you collected that data and where these patients are. So it does allow to maybe future do follow up with these patients. And the fascinating thing, I think that people, mobile phone technology is moving so quickly in Africa. So people may not have other resources, but almost everyone has a cell phone. And I have friends who climb Kilimanjaro, and you can get signal on top of Kilimanjaro. I mean, their coverage is better than some of the coverage we have in terms of their cellular network. So it's a great tool to use. It would be very hard to use like a tablet or an iPad or wireless things because you can't wirelessly connect. But the mobile technology is much more advanced. So here's a few screenshots of what the app looks like. And the other reason I chose this app is you can take pictures. And so it was a great way to collect x-ray data, is you can upload JPEGs and have x-ray data that's available. And Sign likes to get that information because they can see if the nails were put in correctly. So here's what I set out to do in this project. I wanted to design and pilot test this Open Data Kit mobile app and test its interface with the existing Sign surgical database. So I was able to work with the IT person at Sign, and we were able to set up a link where all the data I was collecting in Tanzania was then going to their Sign database. And so we were able to see, could then we translate this data collection on the mobile platform, then could it dump automatically into their database? And then I partnered again with IGOT and UCSF, the resident at the time, David Shearer. They had a funded project from the Orthopaedic Trauma Association to look at differences between plating and nailing. And they needed to figure out a way to get the x-ray data from the study back to UCSF. And so we used this same app. So we basically designed two different surveys, one for my project and one for this funded study through OTA. And then we were able to then train, they had a research coordinator on the ground there that we were able to train to use the app to collect the radiologic data. And then the last part, and this is something Dr. Zirkel's really passionate about, and I don't know if he spoke about it when he was here, but the squat and smile photo as a really quick way to indicate how a patient's healing and if their nail's working correctly. And so he wanted to figure out, could we take a photo of the patient and somehow validate, whether they're looking at angles, or could we measure, their range of motion just using this photo of the squat and smile. So that was kind of the third project I was going to work on. I'm going to kind of go through this. This was some more details about how I was going to go about doing all this. And again, I was there for 4 weeks. Which went by really fast. It's a very interesting setting to be in as a woman. You really have to work to develop relationships and let people know you know what you're doing. And then I had a small family back at home, so that made for other challenges, which is why I don't do a lot of this work anymore. When if you're committed to doing this work, you're traveling a lot and you're gone a lot. So, but very rewarding. So, I set out to test in time, did the phone data entry increase, productivity and the ability for the surgeons there, did it reduce their time of doing this sign data entry from a mobile perspective? And then, did it also increase the type of data they entered, getting the x-rays on the phone versus having to do it? And you'll see the process. They currently, the way they had it set up before they had the mobile phone, is they take a picture using their camera, and then after so many, they'd sit down and they plug in their camera into their computer, they'd upload all these photos, and then depending on the wireless connection in their one conference room, they'd sit down and then they'd have to transmit all these images to the Sign database. So you can imagine the time it would take to do that, and they're so busy and don't have the help, to sit and watch these photos get uploaded. So data entry for a new patient form took about 7 minutes, and it included a 3-minute radiographic image download using the camera. And the data was, so I never was able to fully test the cellular data component, which would have been faster because there's cellular networks everywhere. So we had to do it via the wireless connection. And again, I had to go to a specific room and stand right next to the router and transmit things. So you can imagine it still wasn't efficient, but it did reduce the amount of time. The normal data entry process was about 20 minutes per patient. And so you can see here, we're testing the phone in clinic. So there's Dr. Huanga, and he's entering all the data onto the phone, and I'm taking notes about how long it's taking, and you know, is it getting in the way? And then, you know, you can see, though, the ease with which of being able to take the photo of the x-ray and just automatically have it already in the system was a huge improvement. But, and this is where research in a low and middle income country gets very challenging, while I was there was a doctor's strike. And although these fine doctors kept showing up to work every day to continue to help their patients. And, but because of the doctor's strike, there were a lot of doctors that weren't working. The hospital was backed up, so surgeries weren't happening. They didn't have the staff to do them, and it made it difficult to do all the things I set out to do, because that was the immediate need at the time. You can see this is their outpatient clinic on the left. You know, it's like there's no partitions. Everybody just is in a room, and they sit down at a desk and just do the H&P right there. And then there's one of the operating rooms, and you can see there's cases running side by side. And then this is one of their wards where we would do rounds. And so we tested the phone in all these environments of uploading patient data. So the cohort study that happened with IGOT, we trained the 2 project coordinators to, you can see they do have a tablet and they're using information, but then we were also able to test out the phone application. And again, taking photos of the x-rays was much more efficient. And then finally, the squat and smile was the last piece that I tested. And it did, you know, increase the ability to capture this photo and look at, you know, is a patient healing. But as you can see, I noted earlier, you know, follow-up wasn't a result of not getting the picture or not measuring the patient. It was a matter of the patient physically being in the clinic to get that data. And then, and then the other really fascinating thing that, you know, not having been exposed to this culture and learning, is the cultural issue of taking pictures of patients in their dress and in their wear. So a lot of females have very long, you know, caftan wraps, and so it's really hard to see what their squatting capability is because they're dressed, and there's really, it's not appropriate for them to de-gown, and they don't have gowns or private places for them to undress, so you can actually measure these things. So that was kind of something I didn't think about or anticipate, that even though the patient may return for follow-up, you may have difficulty just from a cultural perspective of getting the data you need. And then the other, you can see in the time I was there, and some of it was based on this doctor strike, it was really, you know, patients and follow-up were not a priority. It was just getting patients who were already in the hospital and were sick getting taken care of. So one of the problems too is the patients were too early from surgery to even get them to do a squat and smile. So it was too early to check for their healing. So this was like the only one I captured while I was there. And again, I mean, she's doing a nice deep squat, probably better than I could do. But again, we can't really see the angles, and her dress is very long, and so it's really hard to see, but there's her x-ray. So lastly, it was really interesting. I didn't set out to do this, but I ended up working with the National Institute for Medical Research for the country of Tanzania, and was able to partner with 2 physicians there who were working on some tropical diseases, and we were able to take the phone technology, and I was able to teach them and help them use this mobile phone technology for a study they were doing in trachoma. And they then deployed these, and it was really, this was actually kind of a fun piece that presented itself that I didn't think about or didn't know, but while you're there, it's like, oh, you have this technology, please share it with us. And it was great. They deployed 6 mobile phones with this survey and were able to collect data on their trachoma study out in rural areas. So, the key to this study was that smartphone technology saved time and did allow for more data collection, and it was feasible to do. So I definitely was promoting that aspect of collecting data and doing research in a low-income setting using mobile technology. Being on the ground to do this type of research is really key. You can't just roll in there for a week and set up your study and then have a research coordinator and say, okay, bye, I'll be back in the States and communicate. You really need to be there to troubleshoot a lot of the issues that happen. I think what I've taken with me in my career moving forward, one of the things when you do global health research is there's a lot of qualitative data and qualitative research that happens and needs to happen first before you can get all the quantitative. And fortunately, I had some background in focus groups and that type of work, so it proved useful in this setting. And then again, you always have to adapt from your original plan. You may have all these aims and projects laid out, and then that happens here in the research we do. We propose and send it off to the granting agency, and it's 2 years before you get your funding, and by that time people have moved on, networks have changed, and you have to redo things, but it happens more frequently here. And so I think if anybody is interested in doing this type of work, I'm happy to talk to you, at another time and put you in touch with other people that do this consistently and on a daily basis. But I think it's work that still does need to be done. Orthopedic care isn't a priority in a lot of these countries because they're dealing with so many other things. But I think the idea of being able to intervene, these people can get back to things quicker. And Dr. Zirkle shared, I think, some of that. So as you can see, again, there's just a lot of people involved when you do these projects and a lot of organizations. And in no way, was it my project. It was definitely a group effort. So, and I did get to spend a little time in Zanzibar for 2 days. So that was a nice treat. So that's the first part of my presentation. Happy to take any questions, or I'm going to actually briefly talk about what I'm doing now that's spine related. So I work not only in the Department of Orthopedics, but I now am an investigator in the Surgical Outcomes Research Center at UW. And some of you know Dave Flum. I think has he spoken at this? Yeah. So he's one of my mentors, and we are working on some spine studies that have been funded through the outcomes group. And Rod and Dr. Hanscom are familiar with this. We've come and present, and we'll be doing some of this work here at Swedish. So patient-reported outcomes is a hot topic. I know that everybody wants to collect them. It's important because we're going to have a lot of value and cost-related things, I think, placed based on how these outcomes come about and who reports them and how they're reported. And so I think it's important for clinicians and researchers to be partnering to kind of make a full circle. And I want to get a diagram that shows, how we can all work together. The outcomes have a clinical implication, but then you can take that data and use it to develop research questions that then we get answers and we make improvements or we design interventions that then feed back into the clinical decision making. And it has, for administration, that's a part of the decision making. My outcomes are better than your outcomes. It's a great marketing tool. So it really can affect all aspects of healthcare. And I think it's a bigger issue, and I still think we don't fully know how to use it well. And one of my research interests moving forward, and in fact my dissertation work is really focusing on what surgeons think about the health states that patients are in and what they think a patient's outcomes should be or are, and what that looks like for a patient following surgery, and comparing that to what patients think or say. So there's a lot of people that do a lot of work on the patient perspective side, and I'd like to see myself as kind of the surgeon advocate for some of this data. And because sometimes the desires or what a surgeon thinks a patient's doing well, and the patient says, yeah, I'm walking and I look totally different, but I'm still in a lot of pain, so you didn't fix me. And, as a surgeon, mechanically, you might say, well, I did. Look at you. You're walking. You're out of bed. And so I think understanding those differences and educating not only surgeons but patients on what the expectation is following surgery, I think will be important moving forward. So the first project's a spine fusion study. We're identifying characteristics, so doing some prediction models on who responds to fusion. And we're using the ODI and 15-point change as somebody who's a responder versus somebody who's not. And you can see our team here, and obviously that team then also includes our collaborators. And we're going to be doing this not only at Swedish, but at ProLiance as well, and at UW and Harborview. So we want to look at non-response, and then we're also, the AIM-2 is an exploratory aim, but we're going to look at some radiographs, and we're going to do MRI, and we're going to try and figure out, are there some predictions early on that nobody really knows, are there good radiographic predictions that may predict somebody's success or failure following fusion. So a lot of this is parlaying from Dr. Hanscom's work, and we're looking at a lot of psychosocial characteristics of patients and asking them different things about their sleep and pain chronicity and anxiety. We're using a lot of the PROMIS measures that are being put forth. The nice thing about PROMIS is these are being used in other disease areas as well. So when this is all said and done, we'll be able to compare ourselves not only just to the spine population, but to the cardiovascular population or the gastrointestinal population, which I think will be really interesting, especially when you talk about this in a policy context, that you know, if we're saying orthopedic care matters and spine care matters, you know, we need to have that conversation against all those other disciplines that are also seeking, you know, money and funding for care. We're looking, it's interesting, asthma is kind of a funny one. It's come up as a signal in some of our early data collection that patients who have some history of asthma have worse outcomes following spine fusion, which is really kind of, so we're going to see, we're going to test it further. It's a blip on the radar right now, and we're going to see if this really, and then because we're in Washington State, we figured it'd be fun to see if we've got some marijuana data that would be interesting, and just, you know, do people self-medicate using opioids and other products. I think it's really interesting, the instrumental support. I recently had a little experience here at your hospital and realized how important it is that we're asking about instrumental support, that people who do get admitted to hospitals, what kind of support they have outside that helps them get back home or get back to healing or brings them stuff while they're in the hospital. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how patients do. And then our second aim, I'm going to move quickly through, but it's just going to be a small case series of these same patients. We're going to look more in depth at their radiographic information and see if we can find some signals that predict response that way. And so these are some of the variables we'll be looking at: modic changes, nerve root enlargement, canal stenosis, inflammation, how many levels involved, whether there was a compression fracture, some of the things we talked about this morning. And our second project is a little bit more with the work I do with surgeons, and this is, we're actually asking surgeons about their interest in participating in a clinical trial for inter-wound antibiotic use. And so this will be asking surgeons across Washington State and our network that's involved in certain, and one, kind of asking, getting an idea of how many surgeons use this. If they use it, you know, what do they think about the evidence related to it? And then would they be interested in randomizing? And we recognize, though, that because some of this is institutional based, you know, this may need to be what we call a cluster randomized trial. And so we randomize by hospital or practice setting. So this is, again, a survey project. The first aim, we're actually looking at our infection data that's in the SCOPE network. And that's in progress right now. And then the AIM-2 will be comparing knowledge, beliefs, and attitudes about interwound antibiotic use. And so again, this will be a survey that we ask surgeons to fill out. And then kind of the third part is, based on all this data, you know, what is the willingness of people to randomize into a study? Should we propose one? Or is there even enough cases of infection for us to design a trial like this? So really interesting, you know, that we were given funding by the NIH to kind of explore and decide even if there was the ability to then design a trial, which I think is a great way of, you know, it's a seed money to even, do we need to fund a big R01, or has this question already really been answered? So if you have patients, I know Dr. Studian and Dr. Hanscom and Dr. Chapman are going to hopefully be helping us recruit patients for the spine fusion project, where we've got some documents and we're already collecting certain data on some of these patients. And so this will just be a new set of questions we're asking them. And then if you are a surgeon who uses interwound antibiotic, we'll be interested in getting your opinion on that. So this is my project coordinator, Elizabeth Austin. She's kind of the day-to-day contact for these projects. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.